So this was developed, like I said, I run the threat research team. And late last year, around Thanksgiving, I ruined my whole team's Christmas and Thanksgiving break to build out a complete live attack scenario. Our goals were be as realistic as possible, use realistic tools, techniques, and procedures to go through this whole attack. So I've got some, well, you'll see what it is. It goes through, so step one, so this is red versus blue stuff, so I'm going to put on my red hat here, and we're going to go through step one, which is our recon and exploit of this. So in the scenario, I am outside your network. I'm the bad guy. I'm outside your network. I do know that you have a web application server sitting somewhere. I think it's inside the walls of your network. I'm going to do some scanning on it. I'm going to figure out what it is. And indeed, with just a little bit of scanning, I find out that you're running a content management system called Drupal. I also know that Drupal had a vulnerability, CVE 2018-7600, that allowed me to upload anything I wanted to, and then I could use it. So what I do is I start up my handy-dandy Metasploit, and we'll start this up, and we may kind of go through, we may kind of split this up a little bit because this gets a little bit tedious to kind of go through each and every one of these. But sure enough, we essentially screen capped all the Metasploit that we did. And so right down here, there's me. Yeah, hat's in the way. Essentially what I just did was, this is all some base 64 nonsense that makes it go ahead and upload PHP web shell up to Drupal. So here I am going through and going to web shell PHP on this website, and I presume you've seen some web shells before, but a web shell is nothing more than an application that allows me to go through and read files and things like that that are back on the web server. And more interesting than that, it allows me to actually execute commands. So it's a little hard to see, but I just typed uname-a here. And so I've got full connectivity into your particular web application. I do a little bit here where I browse through some of the files. One of the files I browse to happens to have the backend database password. So I can yoink some of those passwords. And I can do a query scan. I don't show any of this here, but I can do a query. There's the password right there. I can go through and I can pull the database table, and I'm guessing that probably in your Rail production network, you probably reuse some passwords, so we'll come back to that later on. So here we are back at Metasploit. And now what I did was I went ahead and installed, usually what I say is I install a Metasploit agent. It's Meterpreter, obviously. But I went ahead and installed Meterpreter on that because it's one thing to have a web shell. It's completely another thing to have a Meterpreter on there and be able to use Metasploit to be able to contact and work my way through your network. And the way I like to say it is it's one thing to have a web shell and have remote access to one machine. It's also another thing to have a campaign tool where I can wage a whole campaign inside your network and walk my way through your network. So at the end of this little phase right here, this recon phase, I've got remote code execution on your web application server. It's talking back to me. I'm inside my Metasploit console. You saw me using Metasploit there. I'm remote controlling that. I don't know what else is in your network, but we'll get to that phase next. All right, so let's hope this worked right away. So I have to change hats because now I've got my blue hat on, red versus blue exercises. So essentially what I can see is, sure enough, a detection cropped up. And by the way, this is what we're going to do the whole time. I'll probably end up taking the hats off, but I'll do some red attacks, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to show you exactly what we see on the detection side, right? So here, what do we see? Drupal vulnerability exploited on the web server, and that's what we see, right? So we've got this web server. We detected the Drupal CVE 2018-7600 because we can see what's inside the connection. I'm sorry, what's inside the URI. This is a pretty standard, you can look it up yourself, but it's pretty standard little remote code execution in some of the parameters to Drupal.
Do you have, does this also alert, like if my ticketing system or further up the chain to say, hey, you got a major problem here?
And right here. So we do integrate with ticketing systems. So this one right here, which is That's actually it's a completely separate demo. Pay no attention to this, but the fact that it's showing you right here is the ticket is, what does that say? SEC 19483. We've attached a ticket to this alert, and we know that this is in progress, and Wyatt is the one who's in charge of that. Great question, yeah.
Okay, but so like ServiceNow, that sort of thing you could kick out to?
Yeah, okay. We've got a ServiceNow integration. So where I wanted to go with this was a couple interesting things here, right here in the detection. So this is Drupal 7.8. It did say CV 2018-7600, didn't it? RCE vulnerability. The interesting bit, there's peer device linked to this detection, and you can see it's got a little camera icon. We pulled that from a threat intelligence feed. So that IP address right there is in the threat intelligence feed, and you should be able to click on it. And it says a suspicious endpoint. This happens to be a Russian IP address, and it is on an IP malware watch list that we had in our threat intelligence feed. And we can mark it, say that this is indeed something bad.
Can you integrate this with a firewall to actually block everything from that particular user?
So we get that question a lot. Because we're out of band, and eating a tap or a port mirror, we're not directly in line, but we do have APIs, and we integrate with all the SOAR vendors. We've got Phantom integration and Demisto. We've worked with those guys, so we've got plugins for them. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have the option to, if I have a, let's say, Excel sheet or CSV file, can I import it of IPs that I want to block or?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've long had that ability. So if your CMDB is inside a spreadsheet, which is quite common, we can pull that in. And so ordinarily, what we would see is in this case, the web Drupal 01 is actually the host name that thing advertises. But if he's not advertising a good host name, we'll just have the IP address. I don't remember in particular what his IP address was.
My CMDB is not in a spreadsheet. Just to be clear. But there is a lot of lists you can get from offline or online that literally just.
All right. So on the other side, yeah. Sticks format is very common. The sticks format, and we can eat sticks format. You can just shove it up. We have an API so you can hourly if you wish, daily if you wish. You can just push up threat intelligence feeds from wherever you get them in the sticks format, and we'll happily pay attention to those bits that we can pay attention to and show you. That's where the red icon came from. Yeah, sorry.
Just to be clear.
Right.
I know I've seen it a lot, but I just don't want people to think that's what I have.
Right. So let's just go, and I wanted to drill down into records here. So essentially, the record type is a CVE 2018-7600. Here's our remote address, client IP address, server IP address. Here's the payload. I have to mouse over it because it's quite big, and that's how it got sent up. We got our little red camera icon, and I did want to demonstrate the packet drill down. So this thing right here will take you to the packets, and these are showing you SYN, SYNAC, ACK, and everything right there. So there's your whole transaction. And in the upper right-hand corner, I can download the PCAP if I'd like to store this offline or hand it over to the FBI or something like that. I've got the individual transactions on these.
So this is being detected in relative real time. Why can't you integrate with the firewall mechanisms to protect me further? You just said we're not in line. It doesn't make any difference if you're in line. If you detect it, you can block. You can tell the firewall to go block it. I didn't say you blocking it. Talk to the firewall to block it.
Sure, we've had integrations with that before.
We can totally do that. Yeah, sorry if the explanation wasn't clear. Jeff kind of focused on the orchestration and sort of automation side of that, which is because our large enterprise customers typically invest in that thing that then does firewall quarantining, or it does offlining, or like whatever kind of mitigation mechanism you want to use. But with our sort of trigger engine, some of the features Jeff talked about, we can make a REST call, we can send a syslog message, a JSON blob in real time or near real time to kind of any of those. We have integrations with Palo, for example, on the NGFW side, but anything that can accept a REST call we can do that.
That's been built in for quite a while.
Yeah, and
I
this
was
is,
a
by the
little
way,
confused by the answer, that's why.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Yeah, the nice thing, and this kind of speaks to the CSV question too. The nice thing about being a very product-focused company that was founded by two, frankly, like enormous nerd programmers, is that they build in all these interoperability features, just because they think it's the right thing to do, which then kind of has, further benefit down the line we didn't anticipate with things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, quite a few of those are built on a couple of different technologies, the trigger-based thing, as well as what we commonly call ODS, which is essentially a mechanism where you can send REST queries.
Do you also have a way to save this information as evidence for forensics to use in the court of law?
Yeah, all the information is in here. That's a great question. We have all this evidence. Currently, what we recommend is that you download those PCAPs and take screenshots and start to gather some of this evidence offline. We do have the ability, and we can store this for very long periods of time, but we also know that a lot of investigations can take quite long when you involve
But
law.
do you have a way to store it in a forensically sound way that is actually a chain of custody proof?
I think we'd probably hand off the chain of custody piece to the customer. So you can essentially write this stuff to your own storage that then maintains chain of custody. Honestly, it's a little bit out of scope for what we do, because we would rather just give you the stuff and you can put it wherever you want, and then it's up to the customer to do that chain of custody. Honestly, that's a pretty sticky area too. You know what I mean? So
I agree.
I do get
not
that
really our
question a lot.
spot.
I do get that question a lot. Yeah.
In regards to, I'm trying to read the top, but I could be missing it. In regards to investigations, can I take a couple different events and put them into one investigation to into do further?
So, when we talked about the detections and the ticketing system, is that kind of what you're referring to here?
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I believe that's just we have individual detections, and you can certainly tie one detection into one ticket into multiple detections.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say ticket, do you mean when it goes to your ticketing service, or do you mean these things, these little?
No, the ticketing service, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a bidirectional integration, as you probably sussed out, right? So we write to we can write information to the ticketing system itself, then also pull it back to find out that it's in progress, and this guy Wyatt is the one who's working on it.
I'm not sure if there's another one that shows here on this one. I could expand my timeline. I could expand my timeline to something like the last 6 hours, and then we'll see more detections. So this one's new, and Wendy's taking care of it. So it is bidirectional in that case.
And then my other question would be, how do I say this? It's not a hard question. Come back to me. I've forgotten how to say it.
All right, I'm gonna move on. There's a lot more to demo there, but I think we've kind of got the idea of where we can go with this. So my red hat is back on. And you'll remember where we were at last time. I've got a foothold inside there, but I don't know quite what else is there. So I'll pull out my handy dandy Metasploit, and in this particular case, I'm going to do a little nmap thing where essentially I'm doing a ping here. We can watch this happen. But what I need to do is I need to look around your network and find other resources. And so this happens, and so we're going to go ahead and figure out what we have on the network. And in this case, it's relatively small. We don't have a lot of hosts on here. But now I'm going to do a simple ping scan here and just go look at them. Actually, this is going to list everything that's in there. So I've got some information about now what's inside your network, and it's quite easy for me to build some sort of little map. And in this particular case, again, this is relatively simple, but again, very realistic. There's a bunch of Windows workstations out there, and there's a domain controller at the top. So let's take a look at this. You'll remember that I have remote control on this, and so we'll click this link here. And what we should see is right here on top that we're detecting TCP SYN scans. So I'm poking around. It happens to be coming from that web Drupal 01. The reason I built this is because I really like this one. This is what I call the donut map. So this is our activity map. In this particular case, there's not a lot of hosts in this network, but you can see that I spoke to all these guys. If I had a bigger network, it's really obvious when somebody does a SYN scan, because it's obviously a really big donut, and it brings in all these. And so I just like this graph, and I wanted to make sure that we brought up the live activity maps feature. It's very easy to see the green circles around the outside are saying, hey, this guy has a detection on him, so something has been happening. And I've got my time a little bit messed up, but we can definitely see that during this time period he's been doing some scanning, and he's got a real TCP connection and over HTTP out to the remote 194, which is the Russian IP address. So we can see that pretty clearly. In a real case, he'd probably have a few more because he's a web server, but I think we kind of get what's going on there.
For that kind of thing to be that like complete, you need to have a real good capture setup, right? Because if you want to see the whole connections and not just what is broadcasted, you need to be like spanning or tapping a lot of links. So a lot of time has to go into the kind of setup where you grab the data from.
So this one's a little bit interesting because essentially what we did was we built, ordinarily we wouldn't, if we don't see an ARP request, we won't build a device. So that remote 190, we actually added that device in here because it was an interesting enough device that we wanted to see all the traffic that came to and from it. So we created a device, which meant that we can look at it as a regular device. What we're not seeing in here is we're not seeing like some of the other artifacts like the routers and things that are in between. In this case, this is a very simple network. You're absolutely correct. I can see all the packets on there. If you do have a well-segmented network, usually we solve that at the switch layer, and we just make sure that we can eat a bunch of different packet feeds. We often have multiple interfaces, and you can feed in different packet feeds from different areas.
And just to give you a sense, 'cause again, I ran our PS team, and so our whole job was like spans and taps and stuff. Our largest customers typically tap everything, and this is like financial services, big banks, and stuff like that. That's a minority case. I think as you go down from there, maybe the top, call it 200 companies in the world or something like that, you just get into sort of basic network architecture and figuring out where the L2 boundaries are so that you get all the traffic, including ARPs and basically all the L2 domains. In a typical deployment in, let's call it one data center and one switching fabric, we're usually attaching, sometimes just to one core switching pair because it's a flat L2 network, and a lot of people are deploying that way. And something more spine and leaf or, 3-tier, we might be at an access layer, But it's typically no more than like 4 connections or something like that to grab a reasonably sized data center, if that makes sense. And that's the on-prem version. We'll talk about the rest of it a little later. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but that means if some devices on the same switch that you're not tapping into the links of, you won't see what they're actually doing. I mean, you're maybe tapping into the uplinks of a distribution layer switch, or at a core?
No, it's not. It's not the uplinks. In that case, it's a span feed. So it's actually everything that's passing through that switch. And in fact, everything. So and actually, we generally have to, and we want to only do TX, right? Or maybe only RX, because everything's coming in and then going back out.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, it makes sense. But people allow you to do that, like span the whole switch?
Yeah.
Okay.
They really do.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they have been for a long time. We have a very viable business based on that.
I'm not
growing very well. We've been talking about that. It's our whole deal.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the switches because I've seen switches fall over if you span too many ports.
You gotta know what you're doing, and our PS people generally do, right? And we have very specific instructions on how to do that, including just doing TX, including like just doing a little back of the envelope math to make sure that you're not going to break anything, basically. But the case in which we have affected a production network during a deployment, I can think of literally one time in my memory in 8 years, and that was a fat finger from the network engineer. So, frankly, there are a lot of things that are way more dangerous on production networks than creating spans.
It's a secondary problem for you. I mean, you need to have good visibility into the data feeds that you're getting. So that is probably like a discussion with the customer where to put that when you deploy your stuff.
You're absolutely right, yes. And actually, the bigger problem is switching gear that is outside of, call it like, maybe the big three networking vendors, where the fidelity of the data isn't very good, right? Because they're just kind of dropping packets on the outbound, and then we have to reconstruct what happened with incomplete data that we have lost.
So how do you handle virtual environments? Because if I'm dealing with packets going in and out of my virtual environment, yeah, I'll hit the switch. But if inside my virtual environment, there's a good chance I may never even hit where you're.
There's an agent for VMware environment.
I know, but that actually breaks security to put a VM out there that is on a promiscuous node port group. That is against security policy for almost every virtual environment I know about.
Well, I can introduce you to a number of multinational banks who are doing exactly that. They're attaching to the vSwitch. So
I know they're doing it, but there's other ways of getting that same data. The question is, why use a virtual machine to do it when you can do it through other mechanisms?
We wouldn't necessarily do it via a virtual machine. We would do it by attaching to a virtual switch and then tunneling that traffic over to.
So how you? But
we could do it. We also do it with VMs on a given cluster too. But
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it depends on if you have a distributed vSwitch, you can do more than you can with a standard vSwitch, for example, if it's VMware. So if you have a standard vSwitch, you must use the virtual machine because the only thing it can do is promiscuous mode on the port group.
That's
Correct.
the way
If you
my
have a
lab
distributed vSwitch, you're probably tunneling out of a physical card or in an ER span or something.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well,
An ER span's another
port
option.
mirroring.
I have a question. Deployment-wise, is it common that you essentially, they purchase it, I don't know how your licensing works, and then you deploy it, or is it like, did they learn with you? How does deployment work?
So a couple of different ways. Usually, given that we're talking about kind of enterprise grade stuff, I would say it's changing a bit, and I can explain that, especially during the embargoed part. But I wasn't supposed to say that. But no, so I think in the majority case, we do a POC, right? And the POC tells us what the ultimate deployment is going to be, either because the POC becomes the deployment, or because we learn so much about the network in the course of the deployment that it tells us what we need to know. So good example, go to any given company and ask them, what's your east-west throughput today? And they're like, we have no idea, right? We know that we have enough capacity, we know that nothing's broken, but we don't know exactly how much. We couldn't tell you, right? So if we drop in there, we can tell them their east-west and their packet rate and all that good stuff. So it's typically what we learn at POC. Sometimes, we have no POC purchases even, at the mid-grade. Lower end, is sometimes no POC, but generally we just learn about the network that way.
Okay. Is this something that's quite challenging for people to learn how to use, or is it quite to me it looks really quite user-friendly, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the workflow and the UI is very straightforward and very, very easy to use. Like a lot of platform technologies with a good UI, you can get down into, the nitty-grit and do as much as you want. Like, you can use kind of the trigger engine that we talked about. You can do Python integrations. There's all sorts of, kind of advanced stuff where you can go crazy. But the basic workflows, we spent a lot of time on design and UX. So, yeah.
The reporting wise, if you're reporting to technical as well as more senior leadership, the board, I imagine you've got reports in there that exist already, but can you customize those a bit, like templates, and automate them in that?
Yeah, we've got a whole kind of drag and drop dashboard engine that lets you do that. And to give you an example, we have kind of our highly technical dashboards, and we have templates and stuff like that too. So if I'm a network engineer, I want to see one thing. If I'm a DBA, if I'm, obviously SecOps versus maybe a security architect, a CISO. We've done things in the past where we had a retailer that had two data centers that were active. We did real-time revenue reporting out of those two data centers as traffic moved back and forth to tell them how much money they were making in each one. So yeah, we can do all sorts of fancy stuff like that.
Neat.
So in the interest of time, I think we'll kind of go through a couple more of these. I'm trying now to establish a beachhead. So we'll kind of go through this a little bit quicker because I really want to kind of get through here. I mentioned earlier that I was able to yoink some usernames and passwords. I'm going to try a little bit of a brute force attack to figure out which one of those is going to work against one of these Windows workstations. That's what's going to happen next. I'm going to go ahead and install a Metasploit agent on that guy with, I believe this is WMI exec, although it might be PS exec. So here's me bringing up the Metasploit again. But the point is once I control one of those, the really interesting thing I can do is I can pull down a bunch of information. There's a tool out there called Bloodhound. This is such a common technique to jump from one machine to another machine and steal the credentials on it, and then jump to another machine and steal the credentials and jump to another machine. That's such a common technique that a tool called Bloodhound was written, and I believe I'll be executing Bloodhound in here in just a second. The password was testing123, so if that's your password, you should change that. So we once we establish this beachhead on this network, now that I have that on, now that I have a beachhead on the workstation 3, I can go ahead and do some things. So I do have the demo link in here, and this time, what you would have seen. You would have seen pretty much the same detection we saw before, except now it said, oh, I saw some PS exec happen on this network. Is that something you really want to have happen on your network? And the good is, again, with the L7 fluency that we have, we can pick out the command. Quite often PowerShell is base 64'd, and so we can't always well, in this case, you can see the base 64, and you can go ahead and try to decode it. This is where the Bloodhound part happens. I got a little bit ahead of myself here. I've stolen some credentials, so now I'm going to use some of the credentials that I got, and we're going to walk through. And what I would really like to show, if the demo brings itself back up, what I'd really like to show is what we're doing here is often called a DC shadow or a DC sync. In this case, it's DC sync. But I'm pulling all the information down from your Active Directory controller. I'm getting all that information, and once I have that, I can push that into Bloodhound, and Bloodhound generates me a nice little graph like this. I've seen a lot of heads nod, like this is pretty common technology. Again, this is what happens, and this shows me a map on how exactly I need to move my way laterally through the network. So I'm on workstation 3. I move my way laterally to workstation 1, install my remote agent, my Meterpreter agent. And then eventually I move my way up to the admin workstation. And once I'm on the admin workstation, I've stolen the admin credentials. Essentially, I've got everything I need. And we'll let Metasploit play here for a second as that goes on. And if the demo works, what you can see is you can see that lateral movement. And what's really, really interesting, I hope we're able to get to it, but maybe not, that live activity map that I showed you earlier, it's really kind of neat because it's pretty obvious that somebody went to here and then went to here and went to there, because you've got all these connections in between all these that kind of links them all together. So just from a visual forensics and investigation standpoint, you get a pretty good example of what's happening. So the end result is, of course, that I've got your admin credentials, and I can do pretty much everything I want. How about we just go through? I've got a couple more animated slides for the action on objectives, and then I think we're kind of at time anyway.
Yeah.
So
pretty close.
I think we'll kind of move through this. I'd be happy to take some questions. Metasploit happens up again, and this is the part of the demo where I need to do action on objectives. Right? I've owned your network. I've got everything. There's 3 things that I'm going to do here. I'm going to pull down. This is me actually uploading XMRig, which is a Bitcoin miner. I'm sorry, it's a crypto coin miner. It's not explicitly Bitcoin. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to monetize your network because I can. Another thing that I don't have animated here, I'm actually pulling down some of your files, so I'm exfiltrating a bunch of files. The really neat thing about that is we talked about the SMB records. I can see that a certain user pulled a whole bunch of files, so I know post hoc, I know exactly which files were exfiltrated, so I know what data came out through this because it was pulled down by one of these workstations. So here I am, I've got your Bitcoin installed on there. The next step, as long as I'm in there, I'm going to go ahead and install ransomware once I've pulled all of your files and extracted the ones that I want. I'll go and try to sell those back to you. So that's a screenshot of the ransomware. The Metasploit stuff is really cool. And when my team found this little utility called ASCII Numa, which will generate and record all your terminal sessions for you. we had a great time on that, and you can go through and you get these text files and you can edit them and do all sorts of things. And so I was easily able to make these. Again, what I was really going for here was I was going for a realistic attack scenario from the time that you enter until the time that until you take action on your objectives. The other thing that I can't quite show you but was in the demo earlier, there's a little bar across there that shows kind of the attack chain scenario, right? It's often you're coming in, you're doing your reconnaissance, and then you're doing some lateral movement. So every single one of these detections that we've done, we've categorized according to lateral movement. For example, when I'm pulling down some of your DC sync, DC shadow information, I'm going to call that lateral movement. So now I'm attempting to move laterally, whereas the original exploit, you'll notice, had a little exploit banner on it.
Do you have a link to a kill chain for all this?
We do not have a link to the kill chain. As you know, the kill chain is copyright Lockheed Martin, so we have sort of invented our own little piece of the kill chain. Yes.
So that, I mean, as a security professional, be like, go do this, or do this as to block all that. That would be really cool.
Yeah, one of the features that we started to put into our latest, the latest version that unfortunately not going to be able to demo, is what we call extended data cards. So on some of the most commonly seen attacks, we have a little pop-up card that pops up over the detection and gives you hints and tips about what this means and ways that you can do the remediation for it. So we really are trying to empower the tier 1 SOC operators to say, this is the sort of thing we want to do, and this is the importance of it. Because I spent a long time in an engineering organization running a security team, and I found that one of the greatest successes that I would have would be, oh, you need to fix that cross-site scripting flaw that's in the product. And they would just like, why do I have to do that? I got a million other things to do. I don't want to do that. And I would say, cross-site scripting flaw, look, it lets me do this, and now I own your browser. And then they'd go, oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. Now I want to fix that bug. So to me, this is a lot of education component to this. And so we've tried to build that in as much as we can. Yeah, very pleased with that.
I think you mentioned earlier that it doesn't take action, it just sends off an alert to another system that then would either block or...
Do you want to talk about those integrations?
Yeah. So essentially, we think of this as threat detection, investigation, and response. Mm-hmm. The threat detection and investigation pieces, and forensics, I should say, is in that mix too. So the investigation, threat detection, and forensics, those are things that we all do in our product today, and that are core to kind of our workflows and value props and all that kind of stuff. For response, at least for now, we're basically focusing on ecosystem partners and technical integrations for that kind of thing, as well as our customers' own integrations. So using some of those custom pieces of functionality, the trigger stuff, Python stuff, et cetera, our customers can create integration with you name it, like Ansible or whatever they want to use. And then, as Jeff mentioned, we're working directly with Phantom, Demisto, ServiceNow, and others, to kind of trigger those things. It may not be that way forever, but that's the way it is for now.
Do you have for example, if I would create a Python script that integrated with System X, do you have an online community that we can share it, as well as, somebody that's within your business can validate that I'm not doing naughty things on it before other people install?
Yeah, so that latter point is pretty fun. We have a couple of things. We have community forums where people can just kind of discuss whatever they want. And then we also have a bundles gallery where people can upload those things. We don't necessarily vet every line of code in the bundles gallery. Those things are kind of used at your own risk.
Okay.
For the ones that we have created and vetted and support, we flag those as being we as a company are standing by this code, right? And we actively maintain those things, keep them up to date, et cetera.
Okay, lovely.
That's a very interesting topic. It turns out that because we're a network, because of what we do, we've actually found multiple Chrome extensions that are totally exfiltrating URIs and all sorts of stuff like that. There's a whole nother topic
shocked.
here. Yeah, you're shocked. We're on camera, so I won't go any further into that. But yeah, there's been some really interesting things that we've been able to find that have been sent out in various ways.
So when you set up a virtual switch in that promiscuous mode, do you actually do better monitoring on the virtual switch to ensure that you're the only ones accepting that data? Because
that
that's
we're
a
the
perfect
only-
opportunity. So your collector or forwarder's tap is the only thing actually dealing with that type of data. Because as a attacker, if I get to the virtual environment and notice that's out there, I'll put a VM out there and do the exact same thing. Now I have a rogue VM collecting all data on the virtual switch. You should be able to detect that.
So I think I wasn't clear. We're not using taps and forwarders in on-prem virtual environments. That's kind of what you were saying. We typically attach to a vSwitch or we do ER-span.
Well,
Hopefully a
vSwitch,
distributed vSwitch.
Well, if you attach to a VDS or a VSS, you could only use promiscuous mode. It's the only way.
When you say VSS, you're talking
About the standard vSwitch on
yeah.
vSphere.
Oh, okay.
In a
So
VDS, you can do port mirroring or get net flow, and that's it.
right. So a couple of things.
Or you use the tap function.
So VSS is a network aggregation vendor that we talked to. So
Yeah.
sorry, I misheard you.
And Hyper-V doesn't have any of that.
Yeah, I know. I spent a weekend in a server room dealing with that very problem in 2013, actually. And we have other things going on there. But so I think for us, that's a matter of product investment where we're meeting our target customers. In other words, our customers are typically in the global 2000s and then maybe down another 3,000 or 4,000 from there. And those environments, they will typically have VDS, NSX, et cetera. And we do have integrations with things like NSX. I think the other thing too is that just from a sort of industry megatrend perspective, people have sort of given up on any kind of private cloud as a viable long-term offering. And so I'm not sure how much it matters anymore. And the other thing too, I should say that my knowledge of virtual switching and tapping is now probably about 5 years out of date since I've had to deal with it because I became a manager and manager of managers and then went into marketing and had the rest of my brain taken out, I guess. But so I might not be up to date here and I apologize. I will say that at least in my experience, we haven't really run into a promiscuous mode deployment.
What about container traffic?
Container traffic is sort of, that's an area where we're moving into, I should say. And actually, it's funny to me that you bring up containers right after that virtual machine discussion, because in my experience, in both of those cases, in theory, you've got some real challenges about how you grab the traffic. In practice, you don't. And the reason for that is, in the virtual side, it's very unlikely that two virtual machines that are talking to each other are going to land on the same host in the first place. So the traffic is, generally speaking, going to hit the wire, and you miss a very small amount of it. In the container world, kind of same deal. A lot of the container workloads that we're seeing right now are basically transformational and stateless. So stuff goes in one side and it comes out transformed on the other. It's not container to container necessarily. The other thing is that, from a security standpoint especially, we're not seeing a lot of container adoption in the enterprise yet. We're seeing a lot of playing around. We're seeing some experiments. The exceptions are like cloud native companies that are just getting started. But I'll give you an example. I was talking with a Fortune 200 or something like that. And it was this guy who was running a data lake, and the data lake happened to be kind of part of their core business. They were doing all this analysis, and he was bragging about his architecture. It's like, microservices, fully containerized. And so I was pressing him, so I wanted to know more. And then his face kind of, fell a little bit, and I'm like, what? What did I say? He's like, our security team doesn't really understand containers, so they make us run one container per VM. I was like, that's sad. You just defeated the whole purpose of this. Bummer for you. So I think it's still sort of nascent in terms of adoption in the enterprise, and we're tracking to it. We're trying to skate where the puck is headed, so to speak.